World of Warcraft is a game I've had an interesting relationship with over the years. The first time I remember seeing it was as one of those dozens of boxes on the shelves of my local Best Buy when I was just a kid. The box art was eye-catching, and I really wanted to pick it up, but I was an unemployed small child and couldn't afford the monthly sub. Many years later, some college friends would convince me to pick the game up around the time of the Legion expansion. At that time, I was an unemployed college graduate, desperate for something to do in between sending out job applications, so I said, why not? Back then, my only real experience with MMOs had been about a dozen hours of Wizard 101 and several hundred hours of RuneScape, so I was not prepared for just how different the game would be. After a particularly disastrous first dungeon run, I dropped the game and wrote it off as something that just wasn't for me. The game has a way of sticking with you, though, and after having a surprising amount of fun checking out Wrath of the Lich King Classic last year, and Blizzard announcing a remix event for Legion, I decided it was time to take the game for another and longer spin. So come along with me as I head back into the world of Azeroth, joined by a pair of longtime fans of the game, for a 20-hour trip down memory lane with the Legion remix. Our journey starts after character creation, which was as simple as it usually is with me, minus a server mix-up and entirely too much tweaking of settings to get the game comfortable to play. And we find ourselves in the city of Dalaran. It's a floating city full of wizards, though at the moment it is also full of demons. Fortunately, this is a problem we are perfectly suited to help with. I'm a melee DPS player at heart, so this time around I decided to play a rogue. My first time playing Legion, I ended up going with Outlaw Rogue, a specialization that focuses on random buffs and has a gun. But I wanted to switch things up at least a little bit, so instead I'll be working towards Subtlety Rogue. It trades the randomness for more stealthy options and should be a good choice for easing myself back into how the game plays. World of Warcraft tends towards quests that are some variation on kill X enemies or interact with X objects. It's a time-honored MMO tradition at this point, and having the ability to hide will help me complete those objectives without drawing too much enemy attention. One of the biggest gameplay elements introduced back in Legion originally were the artifact weapons. They're special weapons and are usually lore-relevant that level up the more you use them, though I never got close to getting one my first time around. From what I understand, there were some pretty involved quest lines required to get them back in 2016, but here they just hand you one after a couple of quests. We will need to do the quests we would have originally, but we're gonna put a pin in that for a moment while we finish cleaning up the city. With our new weapons in hand, the next step is to power them up, a task we can complete by doing the thing we were already doing. Having experience on the weapons allows us to buy upgrades. Most are just small stat boosts, but there are also some great abilities we'll get to mess around with later. We spend some time fighting enemies and closing portals, and before long we can take down the leader of the demons invading the city. With that done, we get to meet the dragons that are running this whole remix event, while they advance time forward to where the city has had a chance to heal. Said dragons are members of the Infinite Dragonflight, who run the Infinite Bazaar and use their mastery of time to study periods of Azeroth's history infinitely. In fact, the whole conceit of the remix event is that the Dragonflight pulled your character out of time to help them research this particular period. The Bazaar hosts a handful of facilities that are meant to help players through the event, as well as some repeatable tasks that allow you to earn extra experience and event currency. It also gives you the option to turn on the Heroic World tier, which makes the overworld much harder, in exchange for a sizable boost to character and artifact experience that you get from enemies and challenges. It recommends a character level of 25 before you activate it, but I've played an MMO or two in my time, so I should be good for whatever they throw at me. With all the introductory stuff out of the way, the next stop on our tour is swinging by our class order hall so we can earn our artifact the old-fashioned way, and hopefully avoid any time paradoxes. The order halls are gathering places for characters of similar career aspirations and drove a lot of the early and mid-game questing. While World of Warcraft typically spends a lot of time on the Horde and the Alliance factions, having players spend time working for NPCs that share a class with them is a nice way to shake things up. Unfortunately, the order halls do fall into one of my gaming pet peeves, since even though I personally have only been playing for about an hour at this point, every NPC seems to recognize my character and all of her legendary feats. It's a minor thing, though, and somewhat unavoidable for a game that progresses the world with each expansion the way World of Warcraft does. I can't go back and actually do all of the things from those previous expansions, so it's probably for the best to just treat my character like I already did that stuff. Since I'm playing a subtlety rogue, the leaders of the rogues send me after the Fangs of the Devourer, a legendary set of daggers crafted from the teeth of one of the major demon lord's pets. They're currently in the possession of a demon assassin, that is, a demon who is an assassin and not an assassin who specifically targets demons. And yes, in a game like this, I do have to clarify. And the only lead that we have on their whereabouts is a mysterious figure in the sewers who is certainly not a demon, no matter what the red skin, goat-like legs, and the general air of conniving might suggest. Said contact needs a rune of portals before he'll tell us what he knows, so it's up to us to follow up on a couple leads the guild sent out to get their hands on one. Most of them turn up nothing, but the last one has already been killed by a different demon, so we'll need to take them down before we can find out what they know. Right, maybe the level 25 recommendation on the Heroic World tier has some merit to it. We're able to win the fight with no trouble on the normal world tier, but unfortunately, whatever information our contact had died with him. With a dead end on securing a rune of portals, the most conspicuous rogue in existence suggests that we steal one from one of the local archmages. And you know what? I can't think of a single way that this could go horribly wrong, so let's do it. The rogue quests in this game actually require a fair bit of stealth to get through, though naturally, if you do get caught, things go south very quickly. Once we hand over the rune, our contract tells us that the demon assassin is here, in the city, right now. We rush over to the inn to pick a fight with them, but it turns out that one was a fake, and the real body is elsewhere. Returning to our contact for a friendly conversation, we begrudgingly decide to spare him after a lot of groveling and using the rune to open a portal to the place where the assassin is. Our plan now is for me to run into the demon-infested fortress, kill a powerful assassin wielding magic daggers, and get out with them before anyone notices I'm there. This is a plan that will encounter no hitches at all, I'm sure. No, the plan encountered a hitch. We're knocked out and thrown in demon jail, but fortunately for us, there's no cage that a good rogue can't get out of, and we're able to sneak back to the assassin to claim the daggers for ourselves. Or at least the dummy replacements that we needed to ward off the whole time paradox thing. At this point, we've blown way past where I was able to get to back in 2016, so this trip down memory lane has turned more into a trip just to see what the remix event is like. With that in mind, we return to our order hall and have to choose one of the regions of the map to investigate, though I'm not entirely sure why at this point. Another element of the order halls in Legion was missions that required a certain amount of real-world time to complete, as popularized by some of the middle-era Assassin's Creed games. We're lucky though, because the dragons just decide to fast-forward through those for us. After skipping several quests, an SI-7 agent drops dead right at the entrance to the Rogue Order Hall. SI-7 is the Alliance's version of MI6, so as you might imagine, having a government spy show up dead on the doorstep of a collection of criminals is not ideal. We follow the trail of blood the agent left back to the local inn, where a pair of other SI-7 agents are rifling through her things. Luckily for us, they're also loudly discussing the fact that they had to kill her following some orders from the head of the organization, though they don't seem to know why. A wise person would probably look into why the most prominent intelligence organization in the world is going after its own people, but that isn't me, so we're gonna put a pin in this for now. Instead, it's time for our very first dungeon run. Dungeons are a great source of experience, with the once-per-day experience bonus you get for the group finder, though normal dungeons leave a lot to be desired in terms of difficulty. We'll check out some heroic dungeons later, but for now it's time to sprint through a place full of enemies and bosses that can't stand up to a strong breeze. All of the dungeons cap off different storylines in the game, though the group finder lets you run them regardless of whether or not you've done the quests leading up to it. Needless to say, I have no idea what we're doing here. With the dungeon done, we're going to continue putting a pin in the Order Hall quest and instead investigate a mysterious object seen falling from the sky over the ocean. I have no idea where this is leading, but we should probably check it out before the invading army of demons takes an interest in it, just in case it's some sort of magical artifact. The object sank into the sea, so we're going to have to search underwater for it. The swimming controls smoothly as long as you keep an eye on your breath meter, but it does seem like someone beat us to the punch, so we're gonna have to go poke around elsewhere. That elsewhere turns out to be an underwater cave that houses a sleeping giant and its treasure hoard. While I'm normally used to seeing dragons in this situation, I'm not an adventurer for nothing, and I decide to liberate the mysterious object so I can turn in the quest. Handing the thing over to Khadgar, the head archmage and effective ruler of the city, it turns out to be an interstellar flash drive that contains a message from an old friend of his. Seems like serious business based on how he reacts to it, but I don't know what's going on or even really who these characters are, so I'm a bit in the dark on all this. Now that the flash drive has been delivered, Khadgar sends us to space, specifically to the Exodar, the spaceship home of the Draenei. Like Dalaran, it too is under attack by demons because that just seems to be the status quo for the expansion. Also like Dalaran, we need to close some demon portals and rescue some civilians while we're at it. This mission was my introduction to bonus objectives, which provide extra experience if you spend a bit more time in the area killing enemies or breaking things. Sadly, I didn't notice this one until it was way too late to complete it. Once all the demons are dead and the portals are closed, we drop the flash drive off with Prophet Velen. I don't know anything about him besides his job title and that he's the leader of the Draenei, but it does seem he has an important task that he needs an adventurer's help with. Turns out that a special kind of sentient space rock lives on the ship and is coincidentally both the last of its kind and the only thing that can unlock the data from the flash drive. Now, far be it from me to judge an ancient and venerable seafaring civilization, but I feel like there had to be a better security system than just nothing. Sadly, we are moments too late as the demon leader summons a giant mech to destroy the rock. Despite its appearances, it's really not a hard fight. We do, unfortunately, learn that the leader of the demons is Velen's corrupted son as he dies. I feel like this moment would hit a lot harder emotionally if I knew the characters at all. But I don't, so I'm just left to awkwardly stand here while a father grieves the loss of his son for the second time. With our way to read the flash drive now gone, we plop it down on a pedestal in our order hall, and Khadgar shows up as a head in a crystal ball to tell us there may actually still be hope for finding out what information is contained in the drive. We need to find the Tears of Elune, a magical artifact that theoretically can do the same thing the space rock would have. Unfortunately, I have no idea where to start looking for it other than the entire forest of Val'Sharah. But we're going to be putting a pin in that for now. Instead, it's time to take the flight to the region of Stormheim to meet up with Fleet Admiral Tethys, who is looking into the whole SI-7 problem. He tells us that the band of pirates here in the bay shouldn't be here, and that probably has something to do with SI-7. He wants us to find proof, so we can figure out what to do next. But put a pin in that for now, because it's time to do that heroic dungeon I mentioned. This time, we're making our way through the Halls of Valor, which is a distinct legal entity from any afterlives that may exist in Norse mythology. It's a far cry from a normal dungeon on the difficulty front, with enemies that take quite a bit of damage to go down and boss mechanics you actually have to pay attention to. Honestly, it's a really fun time. We do seem to be invading on one of the Valkyries' big days, so I do feel bad about that. I'm sure we have a good reason for being here. Probably. The final challenge of the dungeon is a boss gauntlet against a series of great heroes, and ultimately a brief fight with Odin himself. Even without having a clue about what the story is, this dungeon was a really good time, and I'm looking forward to doing other heroic dungeons in the future. By the end of the dungeon, I'm up to level 25, which means it's time to turn the heroic world tier back on. The enemies are significantly harder now, but I can actually hold my own one-on-one for the most part. Some of them are still a little bit too tough for me. Killing a random pirate gets me a note from the head of SI-7 offering them free access to the Bay of Stormwind and a royal pardon in exchange for killing the agent. I'm not going to think too hard about how lucky it is for us that the villain decided to put all that in writing and just say that probably counts as the proof we need. But we're gonna add to the ever-increasing pile of pins in the Order Hall quest for now, and shift our attention back towards Val'Sharah. The forest is home to the Night Elves, and it also should be where the Tears of Elune are located. Naturally, I get distracted immediately when I come across an entire village holding an elf at gunpoint. Unlike the lush, enchanted forest look like the rest of the region, this place is more of a horror-tinged vibe that instantly piques my interest. The town is under constant attack from the undead, so we decide to help them defend themselves. Several of the villagers need help with the undead on their farms, though arguably the one who needs it the least is Granny Marl. All she needs for us is to tag the enemies with a flare gun, and she takes care of the rest. With enough undead put back in the ground and villagers helped, the townsfolk come to trust us enough to stop holding that elf at gunpoint. It turns out he's a pretty important figure, or so I assume based on the fact that I'm supposed to be familiar with him already, and his sister is being imprisoned in a nearby haunted castle. That sounds like adventurer work to me, so sign me up. Breaking into the castle means having to take out a short list of named enemies. Times like this make me really happy to be a rogue because having access to stealth makes getting around the enemies in the place trivial. It occurs to me, though, that in hindsight, a haunted castle seems like a terrible place to keep prisoners, what with all the adventurers around. After the important enemies are dealt with, and we've narrowed the location of the prisoners down to the dungeons, as you might expect, we have to kill the demon jailer. It's the same as the one that we fought earlier, so it doesn't put up much of a fight. But unfortunately, by the time that we got here, most of the prisoners were already dead or mentally broken. I feel like WoW these days has a public perception as more of a family-friendly or cartoony game, specifically like an 80s Saturday morning action cartoon. But there are some parts of the Legion story that have some real grit to them. Searching the prison, we find Maiev, who is a clear frontrunner in the silliest armor of all time competition, and that means it's time to stage a breakout. We're able to take the fight to the prison warden, though the people responsible for all of this will have to be dealt with later. On the plus side, I think I figured out what was going on with that very first dungeon that we did. We're going to continue ignoring the whole Tears of Elune thing for a bit longer, because it's time to see how this whole Legion situation came to be. The dragons give us a stone that'll teleport us to a place we normally can't get to during the event, so that we can relive, or live for the first time in my case, the assault on Broken Shore. The island is crawling with demons, and I've heard when this part of the story originally happened, it was actually fairly difficult. For the remix event, however, they have it tuned so that you really don't have to worry about dying. This assault sees the Horde and the Alliance working together for some very understandable reasons, what with the existential threat the demons pose. An evil army looking to destroy your planet does tend to bury old differences after all. Though this whole thing does make me wonder how the two factions go right back to fighting like nothing happened in the very next expansion. I've been told it has something to do with what's basically magic uranium, but that seems like a weak justification after everything they went through together in this expansion. Despite the best efforts of both factions, they're forced to retreat by the demons, and the leaders of both sides die in the battle. Not for the first time, I feel like this would be a really emotional moment if I just knew these characters at all. But again, I don't, because I wasn't playing the game earlier, so I'm just left nonplussed with this whole thing. These lines from Vol'jin, however, are hilarious in light of where later expansions go.
I have never trusted you, nor would I have ever imagined in our darkest time that you would be the one to save us. The spirits have granted me clarity, a vision. They whisper a name. Many will not understand, but you must step out of the shadows and lead. You must be what?
And despite how hilarious that whole exchange is in hindsight, it's followed up by some cinematography that is actually very impactful, or at least would be if the story ever followed through with what it's implying. After tripping down the WoW story rabbit hole for a bit, I black out and wake up in Val'sharah, where a different group of demons are invading and using dream magic to corrupt the land and the druids that live there. After fighting my way through a pile of harpies and satyrs, and taking a brief break to run another heroic dungeon, I have to fight one of the druids that fell to the dream magic. The fights are starting to get pretty tough, but I managed to come out on top. We head back to report to Malfurion, another very important character that I don't know much about, who is tending to a future raid boss in training. We're not supposed to know that yet, so we summon a dragon to see if she can help cure the big guy. Taking another quick break to run a heroic dungeon, and we randomly queue into the one that caps off this storyline that we're working on at the moment. It features us fighting our way through a twisted forest as a captured Malfurion trash talks Xavius, the villain of the day. So, spoilers for later in this video, I guess. But let's put another smaller pin in this story since I wanted to make sure I got the chance to try out one of the raids. The group finder makes it very easy to just jump right in, though it's only one leg, so it's closer to a slightly more complex dungeon with a lot more people. One thing that I find fun about the raids, in contrast to the usual MMOs I play, is having bosses that can just wander around the area. Not knowing exactly where the fight is going to happen may limit the mechanics that you can do somewhat, but it does make the encounter feel more natural. Both of the friends that joined me for this trip did some serious raiding back when this content was current, so I got to hear some fun horror stories about how this raid was on the higher difficulties. Unfortunately, the raid lasted a little too long and we're too late to save the big guy, which Malfurion does not take well. We don't have a chance to warn him that he's going to be kidnapped if he does this, so we should probably go after him. Doing that means taking the fight to the encroaching corruption, meaning we need to kill 50 plants. While that may seem like a ridiculous number for a single quest, we have a secret weapon on our side: dragon artillery. That dragon artillery doesn't stick around long, sadly, as Xavius manages to pull off a shot any Counter-Strike player would be proud of, and our dragon friend gets corrupted. You know, with how many named characters in this story get killed or corrupted, I can't shake the feeling that the player character is the only person around that's actually stronger than the villains. We team up with Malfurion's wife and slog our way through more plants and more corrupted druids before going on a bombing run with a giant bat to really clear the enemies out. You know, this game's pretty awesome sometimes. The trail eventually leads us to a ruined village where Xavius left some fake copies of Malfurion around, which is really quite rude of him. After a lot of searching, we track down the real one, which gives Xavius a chance to gloat and send the corrupted dragon to the temple where the Tears of Elune allegedly are. The fight with the dragon is tense, mostly owing to the fact that I forgot to pack my anti-dragon shield and kept standing directly in the line of fire. We're able to persevere despite that and get another cutscene that I feel would be a lot more impactful if I'd had a chance to get to know these characters. At least we finally have the tears so that we can remove the pin from the space flash drive story. Eventually. We speedrun the dungeon from earlier and free Malfurion, bringing an end to the Val'Sharah storyline for now. Things will pick up again with the Emerald Nightmare raid, but we're not going to be getting to any of that for quite a while. Next, we finally remove the pin from the Order Hall quest for just a moment, which picks back up with us plotting to steal a rare love potion from a fabulously wealthy goblin merchant so we can sell black market knockoffs of it. Now, put that pin right back, because actually, we say hello to Khadgar, who tells us he's found a magic anomaly in the room and asks us to poke it. It turns out to be a full-blown "help me Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope" style of message. We're gonna put a pin in that one for now. Using the tears on the space flash drive gets us kidnapped by a different, giant sentient space rock who tells us that all of Azeroth's gods are dead and their equivalent of Satan killed them. Also, the only person who can stop said Satan analog has been dead for at least a few expansions now. That's a lot to have dropped on you. I have it on good authority that it was a huge reveal back in 2016, but it seems like a weird thing to include in an event like this. Following that bombshell, we're unconscious for 3 days, and there's clearly some lasting side effects based on what I'm seeing here in the infirmary. With no clear direction at this point, I decide to follow up on the other half of the flashback quests. You see, Dalaran used to be located somewhere other than the Broken Isles. To get away from a fleet of demon airships, and to search for some magical MacGuffins that we can use to drive back the invading demons, the most powerful mages in the city teleported the entire thing. Hey, I just realized I finally figured out what the plot of this expansion is, which is great because I'm always on board for a MacGuffin hunt. The next of said MacGuffins that I'm going to go after is a powerful hammer located in the High Mountain region. It's a fun region full of moose people, and the local architecture takes heavy inspiration from Pacific Northwestern Native American culture, which I think is a nice break from the high fantasy greatest hits that the rest of the areas have been. It turns out we're showing up right after a raid where some troll-like creatures known as Drogbar killed the tribe's chief and stole the hammer that we need. We'll need to do what we can to help get them back on their feet if we want to get our hands on that hammer. At this point, I'm starting to really have a hard time with the Heroic World tier in the way that enemies are starting to deal an insane amount of damage. We're not quite to the level cap, but we might be turning the option off if it gets to be too much. While we're helping the locals, things heat up with the raiders who stole the hammer. They launch an attack on a different village by blowing up part of a mountain. I'm beginning to understand why this hammer is so important. Several of the NPCs we've been helping on these quests got captured in the attack, so we need to rescue them as we fight off the raiders. The fights are now hitting even harder, to the point where I almost can't take these enemies on solo. Something tells me the hard mode won't be on for too much longer. With everyone rescued and enough enemies slain, we storm the cave where they're coming from, alongside Warbrave Oro, the guy who came to get us at the start of this questline. Things go just fine right up until we get ambushed by the villain and Oro is killed. So many of your allies die unceremoniously in this expansion. With the assault failing, we have to reach out to the other tribes in the region if we want any chance at reclaiming that hammer. But let's put a pin in that for now. It's time to wrap up the Order Hall quests by actually going and stealing that love potion. The awkward thing about this one is that you have to ignore a warning that you're leaving the bounds of the event to get to the quest objective. This actually threw me off the first time I tried to do the quest, because ignoring a warning like that flies in the face of years of learned behavior from other games. I feel like the better choice would have been to move the boundary of the warning to encompass the quest area, rather than to expect people to wander where you're explicitly telling them not to go. Gripes aside, the place where the potion is being kept is a fancy resort with a golf course, and some security that is way tougher than I would have expected. We find the potion just in time for the merchant to notice the key is missing, which means it's high time for us to get out of there. Fortunately, a death warp and a handy rocket mount make for a quick getaway. We turn in the potion, and that's the end of the Order Hall, from what I can tell. I tried looking it up, and that's the last quest that the wiki had listed, but there are a handful of important plot threads left dangling. A brief conversation with the flash drive prompts the sentient space rock to tell us that there's a way to bring back the guy who's key to stopping the demons, but I really don't have time for this right now. Besides, I have a feeling we'll be seeing him again later regardless. Back in High Mountain, the first tribe we need to ally with is under attack by a flock of harpies. This is a good problem for an adventurer like us. We spend time rescuing some eagles and fighting our way up the mountain, and before long it's time to take down the harpy leader. By this point, I've died enough to just leave the Heroic World tier off, so it's not much of a fight. Before we go and talk to the second tribe, it's time to check out a special dungeon. The return to Karazhan is notable for being what's called a mega dungeon. They're about half the length of a raid and designed for 5 people. It's also a lot harder than the heroic dungeons we've been running. Apologies to the people who were healing us during all of this, because I just could not stay on my feet. One of the quirks of visiting an MMO you don't play regularly is that you have to adjust to how the game telegraphs its mechanics, and that's something I've always struggled with. If you gave me another 20 hours here, I could probably pick it up just fine, but with the time I just have to do my best and shower praise on our healers when I inevitably mess up. Return to Karazhan takes a lot of cues from fairy tales, and one of my favorite parts of the second leg of the dungeon is a section where your character shrinks down to the point where you're fighting regular-sized rats as giant enemies. The end of the dungeon caps off with a passing of the torch moment between 2 major characters, but I died during the last boss, so I didn't get to hear most of it. After making my way back to High Mountain, the final tribe we need to contact turns out to be a strange one. They're very standoffish when we arrive, and poking around turns up some dead bodies that are just kinda out there for all to see. Something's definitely up here. Sure enough, they task us with proving ourselves, which is really just a thinly veiled excuse for trying to feed us to a demon. We can't be stopped by something so trivial and escape with the prisoner that they also tried to throw to that demon. Our new friend agrees to fight alongside us if we can deal with this problem tribe before they can cause some serious harm. I have to admit I love the idea of evil moose minotaur things. They don't put up much of a fight, though. And of course we can't leave the chief of the tribe around to cause any problems. With all that taken care of, our new friend and his tribe of Drogbar pledge loyalty to High Mountain, which means it's time to gear up and reclaim the hammer. But first, we need to take a quick field trip for research purposes. Not too far from the tribe's home is a ruined lab belonging to the dragon Deathwing, a recurring villain and proud member of the Mad Scientist Dragon Club. We relive the time that the founder of the High Mountain tribe used the hammer to drive off Deathwing, which also involved him adopting a baby dragon. Like a lot of fantasy stories, dragons in World of Warcraft can shapeshift into other races. I'm pretty sure about half the archmages in Dalaran are just dragons in disguise. With the backstory out of the way, it's time for a full-on pitched battle between our allies and the tribe that stole the hammer. I enjoy these flying missions, even though I'm confused why some of my abilities keep missing. Once enough enemies are cleared out, it's time to storm the villain's fortress. It's a fun romp through a descending series of caverns and another of Deathwing's labs, though that aspect's pretty easy to miss in the chaos. Fighting our way through the caverns, we reach the final showdown. It's still a normal dungeon, so Dark Rule is a pushover, but it is nice to get some justice for poor Warbrave Oro. By this point, our time in the Legion remix was coming to a close, so we wanted to make sure we ran some raids, both for fun and to see how some of the bigger storylines ended. The queues ended up taking forever, though, mostly from poor DPS players falling asleep while they were waiting. Eventually, we had the chance to fight the Nightmare Guy from Val'Shara. Normal raids suffer from that same difficulty problem as normal dungeons, but it is nice to see the end of this particular storyline. That end has the big guy being cured and some force ghosts of the many druids we had to kill along the way showing up to say, well done. I've been told they'll regenerate eventually as long as they don't die in the dream world, so all's well that ends well. The next raid we have our eye on follows up on the not Valhalla dungeon from earlier. Before we can run that, we need to run a different dungeon for some needed context. That sees us storming Helheim to fight against a powerful sea witch that put a curse on Odin, though for some reason I can't help but think of a certain Disney movie. Having a phase of the boss where you have to knock down the tentacles and watch for breaking floorboards is a fun change of pace. But with that out of the way, the next raid on the list starts with a second battle with Odin and his subjects before we go in for a rematch with the Sea Witch. It's nice to see that our earlier intrusion didn't ruin that Valkyrie's big promotion. There's nothing particularly notable about the fight with the Sea Witch, though I'm sure that's not the case on higher difficulties. Our last raid is the fight against Gul'dan, which is a pretty important fight from a story perspective because he's been a major villain more or less since the very beginning, at least if my hazy memory of Warcraft 1 is to be trusted. And while I haven't seen most of the story up to this point, I have played enough Warcraft adjacent stuff, plus one somewhat underrated movie, to have a feel for how big of a deal this is. While I wouldn't describe this fight as tough, it is more mechanically complex than the other fights we've done. That's what I'd hope for a big endgame fight like this. We still can't be stopped, however, and Gul'dan goes down with probably the best cutscene in the game so far. Nicely done, Legion developers. And the death of Gul'dan seems like a good place to end things for now. Though, with all of this, I'm now even more confused how things progress the way they do from here. And with that, my second foray into the World of Warcraft came to an end. I have mixed feelings on the remix event itself. Between the lack of player direction and some obvious lack of care in regards to the raid finder queue and the weird warning on the way to a quest, it's a poor way to experience the expansion for the first time. But on the flip side, the accelerated leveling speed means that even if you have no idea what you're doing, you can see a lot of the content in a short time. And while I may think the remix event wasn't the best choice, I'm not going to beat around the bush on this. I had a lot of fun playing through the game. I've said many times in the past that if Blizzard ever did proper progression servers or a revamped version of Classic, I'd be willing to check that out. Well, while I was working on this video, they announced that next year the Classic Anniversary servers will be moving into the Burning Crusade expansion. That happens to be the expansion I've heard the most people hold up as the best in the game. But I'd also be lying if I said I wasn't just excited to play more, especially with a more laid-back and structured experience. So there will be more World of Warcraft content from me, though not on this channel. With the upcoming WoW playthrough alongside about 25 episodes of Cape Quest and an ever-lengthening Final Fantasy XIV playthrough to post, I'm going to be moving the MMO content to its own channel next year. I'll have more details on that in the weeks to come. Also, I'm going to be streaming for Jingle Jam again this year, so feel free to drop by and say hello at the times on screen. Now, if you'll excuse me, December's going to be a very long month, so I'm going to grab a nap while I can. Thanks for watching.